There is a word now living inside Microsoft's own official Discord server that the company's moderators have been ordered to delete on site. Not a slur, not spam. A single 9-letter nickname invented by its own users. Microsoft tried to ban it. Microsoft tried to filter it. Microsoft locked the entire server to stop it from spreading. And it still didn't work because the people typing it were not trolls from the outside. They were paying customers on the company's own platform, mocking the company's own flagship product in real time, while Microsoft watched and could do nothing but hit delete. That word is microslop. And the fact that the most valuable software company on earth could not contain a meme on its own Discord server tells you almost everything you need to know about what has gone wrong inside Redmond over the last 3 years. To understand how a trillion-dollar company ends up censoring its own fan base, you have to go back to a moment that, at the time, looked like total victory. In early 2023, Microsoft did something almost no one in its position had managed to do in 2 decades. It moved first. While Google was still protecting its search empire and trying to figure out how seriously to take this new chatbot technology, Microsoft had already locked in a deal with OpenAI worth billions of dollars. And within months, it had generative AI sitting inside Bing, inside Edge, and then inside Windows itself. The press called it the comeback of the decade. Satya Nadella stood in front of cameras and described Copilot not as a feature, but as the future of computing itself. A layer of intelligence that would sit underneath everything you did on a Microsoft device, anticipating your needs before you even typed them. But here's where it gets worse. Because what started as a bold, focused bet on one piece of software slowly turned into something else entirely. An obsession. Microsoft didn't just want Copilot to be good, it wanted Copilot to be everywhere. Office 365, used by hundreds of millions of people worldwide, was renamed Microsoft 365 Copilot. The Windows taskbar, the most visually stable piece of real estate in computing for almost 30 years, was hijacked by a swirling Copilot icon that wouldn't go away. Edge, the browser, was rebuilt around it. And then it started showing up in places that had nothing to do with productivity at all. Notepad, a piece of software, so simple it hadn't meaningfully changed since the 1980s, suddenly had a colorful AI logo sitting in the corner. The snipping tool, a screenshot utility, got an Ask Copilot button. The Photos app got one too. Even widgets, the little panel most users never open, got swallowed by it. Think about what that means. This wasn't an AI assistant being offered to users who wanted it. This was AI being forced onto users who had specifically opened simple, single-purpose tools precisely because those tools didn't try to do anything clever. And every single one of those tools now had a chatbot staring back at them. For a while, the company could point to the headlines and call it strategy. Bill Gates, the man who co-founded Microsoft, who built the operating system this entire empire still runs on, and who has spent the last several years publicly trying to warn the world about exactly this kind of disruption, wrote in his own annual letter that artificial intelligence will change society more than anything else humans have ever built. He wasn't talking about Copilot specifically. He was talking about something much bigger, a technology with, in his own words, no upper limit, one that he believes will keep getting smarter without ever plateauing. And that's the uncomfortable irony sitting underneath this entire story. The man whose name is still etched into Microsoft's origin story has spent recent months publicly warning about AI bioterrorism risk, AI-driven job disruption, and the need for the world to prepare for disruption it isn't ready for, while the company he built has spent 3 years proving, in real time, on hundreds of millions of desktops, just how badly a powerful technology can be deployed when the priority is reach instead of trust. Because what most people are not seeing underneath all the marketing language about AI-powered productivity is a far simpler and far more damaging pattern. Microsoft pushed Copilot into the software people already depended on without giving them a real choice, and it broke the one thing every operating system absolutely cannot afford to break: the user's sense of control over their own machine. And this is where everything changes. Because the backlash didn't stay quiet. It didn't stay polite. It became a meme that an entire user base agreed on independently, almost overnight, the way only the internet can manufacture consensus. Microslop? A blend of Microsoft and the word for low-quality AI-generated junk content that had already become an insult across the internet. It wasn't just clever. It was accurate enough that it spread on its own, no marketing budget required, no influencer campaign behind it, just millions of Windows users who felt the same low-grade irritation every time they opened a tool that used to just work and instead got an AI prompt they never asked for. Read that again. A company spending tens of billions of dollars a year on artificial intelligence got outmarketed by its own furious customers using a single invented word that needed no explanation. The moment that crystallized it for millions of people wasn't a leaked memo or a quarterly earnings call. It was a 30-second video. A developer was using the Windows 11 settings search, the actual search bar Microsoft had rebuilt specifically to be AI-powered. and the system itself suggested he type the full sentence, "My mouse pointer is too small to find the setting he needed." He typed exactly that, word for word, exactly as the AI suggested. Nothing came up. Empty results. He then typed a single old-fashioned keyword instead, and the setting appeared instantly. The clip went viral within days, not because it was dramatic, but because it was the opposite. It was small, ordinary, and completely relatable. Everyone watching it felt some version of that exact moment. An AI system, dressed up as the future of computing, failing at a task a basic keyword search had handled perfectly well for over a decade. But here's where it gets worse. That clip didn't just embarrass Microsoft for an afternoon. It became proof, in the eyes of millions of users, of something they'd suspected for months, that the AI overlay sitting on top of Windows wasn't actually making the operating system smarter. It was making basic, decades-old functionality worse, while wrapping it in a layer of visual noise nobody had asked for. And once that suspicion crystallized into a viral moment, it stopped being a fringe complaint from tech forums. It became the dominant narrative. This is not chaos. This is the direct, traceable result of a strategic decision made years earlier. The decision to chase ubiquity instead of trust. And once a brand starts being defined by its failures instead of its features, the damage compounds in ways that are very difficult to reverse. Because once microslop existed as a shared cultural shorthand, it stopped staying inside tech circles. Someone built a browser extension, a small, almost joke-like piece of software that automatically replaced every instance of the word Microsoft with microslop on any web page you visited. It spread across browser extension stores. It spread across Reddit. It spread across X. What had started as a complaint about one product had now become a referendum on the entire company's relationship with its own users. And Microsoft's response to this is, frankly, where the story stops being about software and starts being about something much closer to a slow-motion crisis of trust. In March of 2026, the same month that Discord server was getting locked down to stop the spread of a hashtag, Microsoft's own moderators tried banning the word microslop outright on the company's official Copilot Discord, not addressing the criticism, not responding to it, censoring it. Users immediately treated this as confirmation of exactly what they already believed, that the company would rather suppress the conversation than fix the product causing it. The server got raided with variations and misspellings of the banned word specifically designed to dodge the filter. Moderators escalated to locking channels entirely. A public relations disaster about an AI feature had now produced a second, smaller public relations disaster about censorship, layered directly on top of the first. Think about what that means for a company of Microsoft's size. This is not some scrappy startup figuring out community management for the first time. This is one of the most resourced communications and PR operations on the planet, and it still couldn't outthink a meme. It tried brute force instead of acknowledgement, and brute force only made the story bigger. What most people are not seeing in moments like this is how much these decisions ripple outward into spaces that have nothing to do with consumer sentiment at all, into boardrooms, into Wall Street analyst notes, into the cold, unforgiving language of quarterly earnings calls. Because while millions of ordinary users were busy mocking Copilot online, a much quieter and much more consequential version of the same skepticism was building among the analysts whose job it is to put a number on Microsoft's AI bet. Here's where the data gets uncomfortable. By mid-2026, Microsoft 365 had roughly 450 million users worldwide, one of the largest software user bases ever assembled. Of those, roughly 20 million had actually paid for a Copilot license. 20 million sounds like a lot until you do the math the way investors do it. 20 million out of 450 million is a penetration rate of barely 4.5%. After 3 years, after tens of billions of dollars in infrastructure spending, after rebranding nearly the entire product line around this one feature, less than 5% of the people who already had access to Microsoft's ecosystem were willing to pay extra for the thing the company had spent 3 years insisting was the future. And this is where everything changes again, because the financial story underneath the meme is just as damning as the meme itself. Wall Street analysts, the same people who initially celebrated Microsoft's early OpenAI partnership as a generational masterstroke, started openly saying the quiet part out loud. One closely watched analyst put it plainly: Microsoft hadn't reached a penetration rate that satisfied Wall Street's expectations. Translation, stripped of the financial jargon, the company had bet its entire AI narrative on Copilot becoming the default way people worked. The market wasn't buying it, literally. 20 million paid seats at roughly $30 a month works out to a meaningful business on paper. Over $7 billion in annual run rate revenue. That's real money by any normal company's standard. But Microsoft isn't being measured against any normal company. It's being measured against its own multi-hundred billion-dollar AI infrastructure spend, against its own promises that this technology would transform how the entire world works, and against competitors who were no longer standing still while Microsoft tried to fix its own backlash. And that's the next layer most people miss entirely. Because while Microsoft was busy fighting a meme war on its own Discord server, the competitive landscape underneath it was shifting in ways that are arguably far more dangerous to the company's long-term position than any viral video could ever be. Tools like Claude Code and Cursor were quietly building deep, sticky integration directly into the daily workflows of professional software developers. The exact technical audience Microsoft had spent decades treating as a captive market through tools like Visual Studio and GitHub. OpenAI, Microsoft's own partner and the company whose technology powers Copilot in the first place, launched an enterprise platform called Frontier that started competing directly on the same territory Microsoft was trying to dominate. Read that again. Microsoft's own AI supplier was now also becoming Microsoft's competitor, fighting for the same enterprise customers in the same market, using a version of the same underlying technology Microsoft had paid billions of dollars to access. This is the part of the story that should genuinely unsettle anyone watching the AI industry closely. Microsoft didn't just risk losing a popularity contest among consumers annoyed by Notepad pop-ups. It risked losing the developer ecosystem, the single most important, highest value group of users in modern software, the group whose tooling preferences quietly decide which platforms dominate for the next decade. And the window to lock in that developer loyalty was closing in real time, while Microsoft's headlines were dominated by Discord moderation drama instead of product wins. Microsoft's own shares reflected the unease. By mid-2026, the stock was down double digits year to date, with investors openly voicing concern that the company's core advantages were being eaten away by faster-moving, more focused competitors, even as Microsoft kept insisting publicly that its AI strategy was working exactly as planned. But here is the genuinely strange twist in the story, the moment where the narrative refuses to follow the simple script of company in decline. Because at the very same time all of this backlash was unfolding, Microsoft's cloud business, Azure, was posting extraordinary growth. Revenue from Azure was climbing roughly 40% year over year. Microsoft's overall AI business was on pace for something close to $37 billion in annual sales, up well over 100% from the year before. So this isn't a simple story of a company failing at AI. It's something far more complicated and, in some ways, far more interesting. A company simultaneously winning at the infrastructure layer of artificial intelligence, the unglamorous pipes and servers that power everyone's AI products, including, ironically, some of its own competitors, while losing badly at the consumer-facing, brand-defining layer that was supposed to be its crown jewel. Think about what that contradiction actually means. Microsoft built the foundation the entire AI industry runs on top of, and it is making enormous money doing exactly that. But the product it placed directly in front of hundreds of millions of ordinary users, the product meant to be the human face of all that infrastructure, became a punchline. The plumbing is thriving. The storefront became a meme. And once that contradiction became impossible to ignore internally, Microsoft did something almost unheard of for a company of its size and ego. It admitted, at least partially, that it had gotten the consumer rollout wrong. In a blog post that read less like a corporate announcement and more like an apology dressed up in careful corporate language, Pavan Davuluri, the executive in charge of Windows and devices, wrote that the company was committing to what he called a renewed focus on Windows quality. He promised fewer disruptions. He promised a deliberate pullback on what he carefully avoided calling microslop, but was unmistakably describing exactly that, the unnecessary, intrusive AI bloat that had defined the user experience for the better part of 3 years. And the proof wasn't just in the words, it showed up in actual observable changes rolling out across the operating system. The Ask Copilot button vanished from the snipping tool. It vanished from the Photos app. In Notepad, the jarring brightly colored Copilot logo that had sat in the top right corner, the same logo that had become a small, constant symbol of everything users resented, was quietly stripped away. Microsoft began rebranding some AI features away from the Copilot name entirely, calling them things like writing tools instead, a tacit admission that the Copilot brand itself had become contaminated by association, that slapping the name on a feature no longer made users excited, it made them suspicious. Internally, the company reportedly launched something it nicknamed Windows K2, not a new version of the operating system in the traditional sense, but a quiet, deliberate reshuffling of engineering resources away from Copilot expansion and toward fixing the basic pain points users had been complaining about for years. After 3 years of full speed-ahead AI integration, Microsoft suddenly had a backlog of fundamental performance and reliability issues that had been deprioritized in favor of the AI push, and now it was scrambling to address years of accumulated grievances all at once. But here's where it gets worse. Even in the middle of what should have looked like a retreat toward sanity. At one point, Microsoft reportedly deleted its own blog post outlining the Windows quality commitment, and the fact that deleting it was even considered newsworthy tells you something important. It suggests that while the internal mandate to clean up the mess was genuinely real, the corporate optics of publicly admitting defeat on a strategy this central to the company's identity were still deeply uncomfortable for the people running it. You don't quietly delete an apology unless admitting fault still feels dangerous, and the retreat wasn't limited to Windows. It spread across the entire Copilot ecosystem in ways that, taken individually, might look like routine product management, but taken together, paint a picture of a company in genuine strategic retreat. GitHub Copilot, the version of the product actually beloved by developers, arguably Microsoft's one unambiguous AI success story, moved to usage-based billing starting in June of 2026, forcing both individual developers and enterprise finance teams to start asking a question Microsoft had spent years trying to avoid. Is this actually worth the cost? Free Copilot chat? Inside Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote, features Microsoft had rolled out to business users with great fanfare only 6 months earlier, were switched off entirely for organizations that didn't pay for a full Copilot license, with only a few weeks of warning. Companies that had been given a taste of the feature for free were suddenly told to pay up or lose it. A move one industry publication bluntly described as Microsoft taking back something it had just given away, unless customers were willing to open their wallets. Development of Copilot on game consoles was reportedly stopped. Mobile Copilot development was reportedly being wound down. Piece by piece, the empire that Microsoft had spent 3 years building, Copilot in everything, everywhere, all at once, was being dismantled by the same company that built it. Not because artificial intelligence had failed as a technology, but because the strategy of forcing it onto every surface of every product had failed as a business decision. And this is where the story stops being just about Microsoft and becomes a much bigger signal about the entire AI industry's coming-of-age moment. Because what's happening here isn't really retreat from AI. Microsoft has been extremely clear in its own messaging that it isn't walking away from artificial intelligence. It's becoming more selective about where that intelligence actually belongs. Reports describe a shift toward what's been called a less is more philosophy, focusing AI development on the places it provides genuinely meaningful utility instead of plastering it across every corner of the operating system simply because the technology existed and the company wanted to look cutting edge. Think about what that shift actually represents for the wider technology industry. For the past 3 years, the entire AI boom has been built on a kind of arms race logic. Every company racing to integrate generative AI into as many products as possible, as fast as possible, terrified of being the company that looked behind the curve. Microsoft was the loudest, most aggressive example of that logic taken to its extreme conclusion. And now Microsoft, the company that arguably started the trend, is the one publicly admitting the trend went too far. When usage becomes credit-based and cost-conscious, users and companies alike start asking a much harder, much more honest question. Is this task actually worth spending money on artificial intelligence to complete? That single question, quiet, financial, unglamorous, might end up being more disruptive to the AI industry's current trajectory than any meme ever could. This is not the end of AI in consumer software. This is the end of AI everywhere, indiscriminately, by default. And the company forced to learn that lesson first, in the most public and humiliating way possible, happened to be the one with the deepest pockets and the loudest marketing machine in the industry. There's a strange, almost poetic irony sitting at the center of all of this, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. The same week Microsoft was deleting blog posts and banning words on its own Discord server, Bill Gates was telling the world in his own annual letter that artificial intelligence has no upper limit, that its capabilities will keep advancing without plateauing, that society needs to prepare now for disruption that's already underway. He wasn't writing about Copilot specifically. He was writing about something much larger, a technology powerful enough to reshape healthcare, reshape education, reshape the basic structure of work itself, and dangerous enough that he listed bioterrorism, not job loss, as his single greatest concern. And yet the company carrying his name into this new era, the company built on the operating system he helped create, spent the same period proving, on hundreds of millions of ordinary desktops, that even a company with virtually unlimited resources can still get the basic execution of that powerful technology catastrophically wrong, can still alienate the very users. It depends on, can still mistake forced ubiquity for genuine value. What happens next is genuinely uncertain, and anyone telling you they know exactly how this resolves is selling you something. Will Microsoft's quieter, more selective approach to Copilot actually rebuild the trust it spent 3 years burning through, or has the Microslop label already calcified into something closer to a permanent brand identity, the way certain corporate reputations, once earned, simply never fully wash off? Will Azure's extraordinary growth at the infrastructure layer be enough to carry Microsoft's overall AI ambitions, even if Copilot itself never becomes the dominant consumer product the company once promised investors it would be? And what happens to every other technology company watching this unfold from the sidelines? Will they learn from Microsoft's very public, very expensive lesson and pull back before making the same mistake? Or is the industry-wide pressure to integrate AI into absolutely everything still strong enough that we're about to watch several more companies walk directly into the same trap, fully aware of what happened to Microsoft and unable to stop themselves anyway? The infrastructure war is still being won by Microsoft. The trust war is still very much being lost. And somewhere underneath both of those storylines sits a much harder, much more uncomfortable question that nobody in this industry has fully answered yet. Not Microsoft, not its competitors, not even the people who built the underlying technology in the first place. When does artificial intelligence actually make a product better? And when is it simply being added because the alternative, standing still in this current climate, feels even more dangerous than getting it wrong in public? Nobody currently running a major technology company seems entirely sure of the answer. And that uncertainty, more than any meme, more than any viral video, more than any quarterly earnings call, might be the single most important story still unfolding in this entire industry right now.